Welcome Reckless Wanderers, it's Robert here, and today I have a softcore build for you that uses the synergy of 3 unique items to create a really fun build that allows you to clear maps super fast. The Sire of Shards unique Serpentine Staff grants us 4 additional projectiles without a damage penalty, increases overall projectile damage, and fires all projectiles in a nova. The Reign of Splinters unique jewel grants 2 additional projectiles for each totem, but reduces the totem damage a bit. And finally, the Soul Mantle unique chest allows us to summon 1 additional totem, but with the negative effect of cursing us with a random curse whenever one of our totems dies or expires. For this reason, we're running 3 curse removal flasks. We have 2 ample Quicksilver flasks of warding, so we have a high mobility. And on top of that, a perpetual divine mana flask of warding, which has 6 uses but only consumes 5 charges on each use, making it almost always full, even in longer boss fights. The other flasks we're using are a seething divine life flask of heat, that's our freeze removal and our instant heal, and we have a catalyzed divine life flask of staunching, that is a longer duration heal that heals us for 2/3 of our life and also gives us bleed removal whenever we're facing puncture mobs. The main skill we're using is Arctic Breath, because Arctic Breath deals high and consistent cold damage. Because it deals such a high damage, it has a pretty fair chance of freezing mobs, and whenever it hits a mob it also creates an explosion, and that explosion can overlap with other projectiles. Usually projectiles emitted from the same source cannot hit a single enemy more than once, but with enough obstacles around or with enough projectiles around, and if you place your totems correctly, mainly in the center of a pack or close to a wall, then the explosions caused by Arctic Breath, by the 21 Arctic Breath projectiles that you have, they will cause a lot of overlap damage. Arctic Breath is tagged as cold, spell, projectile, AoE, which is why we're scaling elemental damage, spell damage, and area damage in the passive tree. Sire of Shards staff grants us additional projectile damage, Soul Mantle grants us additional spell damage, so they synergize really well together. I've chosen the support gems in a way that they synergize well with Arctic Breath in a totem spec. Faster casting pumps out as many heads as possible. Cold penetration multiplies our damage because it lowers the resistances of enemies, and it synergizes well with our frostbite curse. And Hypothermia multiplies the damage even more whenever enemies are chilled. Arctic Breath always chills enemies because it leaves a trail of ground ice, and it creates more ground ice whenever it explodes. Furthermore, we're using Arctic Armour, which also leaves a trail of ground ice, and whenever we get hit by an enemy, that enemy is chilled for a short duration. So the Hypothermia support gem and the moar multiplier almost always applies. Soul Mantle supports every socketed gem with a level 14 spell totem, which makes socketing gems in this chest particularly difficult. I have chosen to use a ball lightning, faster casting, added lightning damage, slower projectiles, so I have ball lightning totems whenever I'm facing cold resistant bosses. The damage is comparable to the Arctic Breath totems. It's not necessarily higher, but I'm using it always when the Arctic Breath totems don't deal as much damage to a boss as this spec does. I'm also using an Enduring Cry in this chest because Enduring Cry cannot be supported by spell totems since it's not a spell. Enduring Cry gives me endurance charges, which gives me some physical mitigation, and it also allows me to use my Castman Damage Taken Immortal Call setup. Castman Damage Taken is kept at level 12, triggering at 1.6k damage, which is a fair high amount of damage, but it allows me to not trigger that often while having a almost 2.5 second Immortal Call uptime when I have 3 endurance charges, which is pretty nice. The other defensive setup that I have is Vaal Grace supported with increased duration that I use whenever I face ranged mobs or leapers, chargers, dischargers, or flicker strike mobs. Since it also prevents spell damage, it's a very good Vaal gem to use in tricky situations and also against boss fights. In this link I also use Frost Wall. Frost Wall also synergizes very well with this build when you have single target, because you can trap the boss in the Frost Walls, put the totems in the middle if there's room for them, and the shotgunning will make it so that the boss takes heaps of damage from overlapping explosions. The other skills I'm using is Arctic Armour in the remaining slot of my gloves. I have Frostbite in the remaining slot of my staff. I have Elemental Weakness. If I'm using the Ball Lightning totems, I can use Elemental Weakness over Frostbite. I have Summon Flame Golem because it increases my overall damage. I don't have enough icons on my hotbar, so I actually have to swap this to cast the Golem. It's a bit annoying, but yeah. And then in my last link, I have Clarity over here. It actually doesn't need to be linked, but the other three is Leap Slam with Fortify and Faster Attacks, which I use as my mobility skill and also to have a little bit more of defense. Since I have a lot of area increases from the tree, I actually don't have to leap very close to mobs in order to activate it, which is pretty nice. The other items I'm using are High Life, High Resist and High Dexterity. This build requires a lot of dexterity to use all the gems, and I don't want to invest too many passive points in it, which is why getting Dex and Gear is fairly important. In terms of the passive tree, this is a regular totem spec. We start as a Templar, branching out the elemental damage, spell damage cluster, picking up a little bit of life, then going through the area of effect cluster through Elementalist, speccing straight into Ancestral Bond. This allows us to level this with Flame Totem and having absolutely no problems during the leveling process. Then we go down, pick up the Dexterity node here to give us a little bit more freedom with our gear and to prepare for the later gem levels, and we pick up Unrelenting. This not only gives us a lot of life, but also reduces the cost of our totems. Then we get the first jewel socket and go over to Shaper, giving us life and mana regeneration. Once we have that, we pick up more mana and mana reduction that we need for our totems and start to head over into the Witch Tree. Here we pick up more life and mana regeneration, go over to Elemental Dominion. Once we reach Elemental Dominion, we get the life cluster over here to prepare for Cruel and Early Merciless. And once we're there, we're getting through the crit into Blast Radius, which is our second area of effect. Notable. Those two notables, Blast Radius and Amplify, are helping a great deal with our Arctic Breath explosions. Once we have that, we head over and pick Cruel Preparation, which is the last life cluster. Well, actually not, it's not. We're having the Cyan life cluster as well. But once we have that, we start to pick up totem nodes. We have the totem damage over here. We have the totem damage over here. We have totem cast speed over here. The last cluster we're getting is Shaman's Dominion, which increases our global crit chance for 4 seconds by 100% whenever we cast a totem. You can actually see that in the tooltip. We go over here. Our current crit chance right now is 12%. When we cast a totem, it goes up to 16. Once we have that, we continue to get more spell damage. We have the elemental damage Frostwalker over here. We have all the spell damage nodes from the Witch. And we have Celestial Punishment over here, Celestial Judgment with elemental damage and elemental penetration. And once that's done, you can get up Cast Speed Light of Divinity for even more spell damage. There's another jewel socket to pick up here. Potentially another one over here, just 2 points away. And whenever you need more life, there's also this life cluster over here. Overall, this character is very fun to play, although I wouldn't recommend to play it in hardcore. The defensive concept is not really there. We're only having a fairly normal life pool. We're relying a little bit on Vaal Grace. The character does not have much armor or evasion. In terms of auras, the Arctic Armor helps a little bit to mitigate damage. You could swap Clarity for Grace, but then you will have to pop your mana pot even more, because the totems, although we have a lot of mana cost reductions from the tree, are fairly expensive. Still, this character died only 8 times, which is not much for my usual softcore playthroughs. Died 3 times during leveling, and the other times in maps, mostly doing trying stupid stuff. I haven't died, however, to situations like dual Jungle Valley boss or dual Labyrinth boss, which is now Terrace. And yeah, it's heaps of fun. If you have any questions, any suggestions, leave them in the comments below. I will continue to play this character until the 1 month starts. My name is Robert, and I hope to see you in game.